Hi there, and welcome to another AP Environmental Science video. In this video, we're going to be looking at aquaculture and sustainable forestry. First, I want to start with a case study. A 2021 study by the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability suggests that rising and shifting demand for seafood is going to increase through 2050. And here we see a picture of a woman selling fish at a street market in Vietnam. And I think you can imagine that as the world adds more people, and as those people generally rise in affluence, there will be an increase in the amount of fishing that populations will be eating. We can see a graphic down here of fish consumption worldwide. Countries that are in darker blue are consuming more fish per capita. Countries in lighter blue or lighter green consuming a little bit less fish. And you can imagine again that countries that are experiencing rapid growth, rapid population growth, and that already consume a large amount of fish will begin consuming even more and more fish as those populations expand. One more graphic I'd like to look at, and this is from a website called Our World in Data, is the correlation between GDP per capita and fish consumption. Here we're graphing GDP per capita on the x-axis and fish consumption on the y-axis. And you can see, generally speaking here, that there is a trend. There is a trend that as GDP increases, the per capita fish consumption generally increases as well. You could draw a nice trend line right through the data there. So with this as a framework, with these changing habits and an increasing amount of fish consumption as a framework, I then want to pivot to our two learning goals. Our learning goals in this video are going to be explaining the environmental benefits and consequences of aquaculture, and then describing some methods for reducing human impact on forest tree removal. So we're talking about all this fish consumption, and I think now it's important to talk about the idea of aquaculture. And another method of farming that can increase food production is, again, this aquaculture. In a previous video, we talked about sustainable agriculture practices. Here we're shifting from the land into the sea. Aquaculture can be defined as the controlled breeding and harvesting of aquatic plants and animals in freshwater or in marine environments. And down below, you see 4 common aquaculture systems for raising fish. You see some that are off the shore, out in marine environments. You see some large nets that are submerged and can bring up things such as sea bass to the surface. You see some interior or some landlocked facilities. And then you see some indoor facilities that are examples of aquaculture. And based on the species that we're looking to raise, based on the environment, based on the economics, the scale, all these can be different approaches for aquaculture. So this idea for aquaculture is that aquaculture is going to allow for an increase in fish production, without depleting or collapsing fisheries. And I think you can appreciate that if there's an increase in demand for seafood, natural offshore fisheries are not going to be able to support all of that fishing. There'd be a tragedy of the commons that might occur. Again, the demand for fish is increasing. I've stressed that several times. That's an important concept for us today. And the increase in the food provided is going to come primarily from aquaculture. That is to say that offshore fisheries or natural fisheries are all but maxed out, both for sustainability purposes, for legislative permitting reasons, and for practical purposes. There's perhaps fewer fish to be harvested. So what we can do is we can look at a graph then looking at what the projection of fish catches is going to look like, fish landings is going to look like. And here we're projecting quite a ways into the future, about 25 years into the future. You can see that fisheries is just about leveling off, that there's not a lot of projection that will increase, whereas aquaculture is going to grow rapidly. The hope is it grows rapidly to pick up the slack there. I've got down here just another picture of aquaculture. Here we're growing, looks like some sort of shellfish, and there's a scuba diver investigating the shellfish cages or traps. Again, this is an artificial harvesting method for shellfish. This aquaculture can be done in floating nets. It can be done in near coastal marine waters. It could be done in coastal ponds. This would be known as like brackish water. So water that has maybe a low salinity or less salt than the ocean, or it can be done in inland ponds. Inland ponds would be freshwater. All of these are viable places to do some aquaculture. Or as one of the pictures above showed, you could do this in a totally enclosed land structure. This would be vats or tanks inside of a building. And I want to look at some benefits of aquaculture as well as some criticisms of aquaculture. Looking at the benefits, this increases food production. Natural fisheries are simply maxed out. There's no need to take more from those fisheries. And the above ground tanks don't allow for fish species to escape or for diseases to spread out into the wild. That said, there are some criticisms of aquaculture. There's an excessive need for filtration and pumping in food and medication. Waste products specifically need to be filtered out. And because of the close proximity of the animals to one another or the plants to one another, there needs to be food and medication pumped in. Disease can certainly proliferate, and non-native fish could escape. Not every system is perfect. And if fish escape, you all of a sudden have non-native fish out in the wild ecosystem. Looking at aquaculture in totality here, we can look at sort of the inputs and the outputs of the system. Input, you've got, again, these pharmaceuticals, chemicals, feeds going in, foods and oils need to be inputted. Perhaps disease parasites could both be in and out. There's got to be some methods to protect against predators. Food waste needs to be disposed of somehow. You've got all these fish living in proximity. They can't be existing with food waste. And again, we need to deal with escaped fish. These are all serious considerations. As with all things in this course, we need to consider the ecological and the um, uh, economic considerations, that there's valid economic reasons for doing aquaculture and valid ecological concerns, perhaps, with aquaculture. To pivot gears a little bit, the next learning objective I want to look at in this video is talking about methods for reducing human impacts on forest tree removal. So we shifted to marine systems for aquaculture, shifting back to the land now. Recall that clear cutting and selective cuttings are two different methods for removing trees. Again, clear cutting and selective cutting are two different methods for tree removal for forestry. And restocking trees after clear cutting, excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. As I was saying, restocking trees after a clear cut is a process known as reforestation. Well, that process of reforestation is going to allow for a variety of benefits here. One is you're going to be repopulating the forest. You're simply going to be planting more trees. Second, by losing trees and losing tree roots, there's a risk of erosion and soil erosion. By doing reforestation, you reduce that risk of erosion. And then finally, by planting more trees, we begin to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is going to help offset the carbon that's released in cutting down and disposing of those trees. So this is getting at the idea now of sustainable forestry. And sustainable forestry can be defined here as the method of managing forests to produce wood while also providing clean water, maximizing biodiversity, and maximizing what's called carbon sequestration, or taking atmospheric carbon and returning it to biomass. And we see down below a graphic of a logger removing a tree in sections. This would be the example of perhaps clear cutting or selective cutting or logging of some sort. And we want to offset that logging with some sort of reforestation. And if you are logging and reforesting at the same rate, well, that is sustainable. If you're logging faster than you're reforesting, forest populations will decrease. If you happen to reforest faster, that would allow there to be an increase in tree populations or in forest populations. So how do we do this then? How do we do this sustainable forestry? And there's going to be a variety of techniques that accomplish sustainable forestry. One thing you could do is you could log with animals. And logging with animals instead of fossil fuel powered machinery is going to reduce emissions. Second thing you could do is you could choose specific species of trees to maintain a species evenness and species richness. So this would be reducing the incentives for clear cutting. This would be increasing incentives for reforestation and diverse reforestation. When logging, you could attempt to avoid habitat fragmentation. That would minimize biodiversity loss, minimize species loss or species extinction. Again, this is not compatible with clear cutting. This would have to be selective forestry or selective cutting. And then finally, you could look for sustainable agriculture, sustainable forestry, excuse me. You could look at minimizing the use of wood and lumber in construction and consumer products. In the United States, we build a lot of our houses out of wood. Wood and trees were plentiful in the early United States, and that created a culture of building wood-framed houses. And we can now ask ourselves, is that still a sustainable practice? Or are there other more sustainable materials that could be used? And perhaps even more effective materials, better insulating or better strength materials that could be used instead of wood. But we're going up against this cultural momentum, cultural inertia here of using wood products. Another important focus in managing forests is to manage fires. And fires are a reality of any forest ecosystem. And we can look here at the results of the famous Yellowstone fire of 1988, just absolutely decimated large swaths of Yellowstone National Park. Incredibly, Yellowstone is so dry for much of the year. There's really minimal degradation, really minimal rotting of dead wood, such that you get these quite old dead trees that are sticking around in a way that in the relatively wet East Coast, you get decomposition setting in almost right away. Thinking about managing fires, originally the goal was to suppress fires entirely, but this led to large quantities of dead biomass, making forest fires much worse. We rapidly learned that fires are a natural process, and periodic planned fires might actually help to clear out underbrush, clear out dead biomass, and minimize the severity of subsequent fires. This technique is something called a prescribed burn. Prescribed burn are fires deliberately set under controlled conditions, preventing worse fires in the future. And what's interesting is different management agencies at both the federal and state level have different philosophies about prescribed burns. And depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, whether you're in a national park, a state forest, a national forest, Bureau of Land Management land, there might be different policies about the extent to which prescribed burns can take place. But certainly with a changing climate and a drying climate, the risk for severe and catastrophic fires is increasing. And that's compounded by expanded development in the West, where we have more cities, we have more towns, we have more people and buildings. And the more you put out there, the greater risk that those are going to be in the way of the path of a fire. So sustainable forestry, again, another technique for addressing this impact on humans, and also managing our forests in a way that we can continue to extract resources in a sustainable manner. So thank you for watching this video, and I hope by the end of it, you feel confident about the two different learning goals. Hope you feel confident about your ability to explain the environmental benefits and consequences of aquaculture, and also you feel confident about describing methods for reducing human impacts on forest tree removal. Thanks for watching. Take care.